This is the Earley AI Podcast, hosted by Seth Earley. Join us as we delve deep into the passions, expertise, and experiences of thought leaders and practitioners to talk about what's possible with artificial intelligence. The Earley AI Podcast is sponsored by Earley Information Science, your digital transformation journey with design and deployment of innovative technology solutions, as well as Vector. Now enjoy the show.
Well, welcome to today's Earley AI Podcast. I'm your host, Seth Earley. Each episode explores how artificial intelligence is reshaping the way organizations manage information, create value, deliver better customer experience. Today, we're going to be diving into the future of search, retrieval, and intelligent agents, and how, of course, clean, structured data is really important to the foundation for every AI success story. Joining me is Bharat Guruprakash. He's Chief Business Officer at Algolia, which is a global leader in AI-powered search and retrieval. He has spent many years helping organizations harness AI to connect people with the right information at the right time, as we like to say in knowledge management. He brings a unique perspective to where AI-driven search is heading and what it takes to build systems that respond to real-time context. Bharat, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Seth. Very glad to be here and excited to have a conversation about where the world is heading.
I know this is such an interesting area. And what I wanted to do is start with what's your take on the biggest misconceptions that organizations have about search, about AI and search? And if you want to kind of roll data and content into that, you can. But give me the big picture. What are people not understanding, or what are they misconceiving about this space?
Yeah, I think the biggest, we speak to so many customers and, about 2 or 3 years ago, it was, hey, search is dead. Today, it is, oh my gosh, we need retrieval or search. And I think the big misconception is that AI does search and that LLMs do search. And that's partly because of the way it presents information to you. And so everyone thinks that LLMs can do all of it. In the traditional sense, search is about presenting all the options to you and you decide what the truth is. LLMs package the truth for you. So when you search for something, they sort of like package it up and give it to you. I think the big conception is that you don't need retrieval under the hood for effective generative and agent first world. And today we're seeing that happen. Like suddenly now retrieval is one of the hottest topics. Yeah. It's interesting for me, at least being in a search company, to see this sort of like evolution.
Yeah, it's been a pendulum and it's really swung from one extreme to the other. And it was something where people were saying, oh yeah, LLMs are going to do it. And then what do we find? We find that, number one, LLMs have a model of the world, but they don't necessarily understand your world, your products and services and solutions and so on, or your customers, your routes to market, your competitive advantage, your knowledge, right? All of that stuff is proprietary in how you differentiate in the marketplace. And an LLM isn't going to do that unless we actually connect it to our sources. So that brings in this idea of retrieval augmented generation. And for those of you who are not familiar with RAG, Retrieval Augmented Generation, it's saying to the LLM, don't just use your knowledge of the world to answer my question. Use your knowledge of the world to make this conversational and understand the user's intent, but answer the question based on my data, right? Get it from my source of information, my source of truth. Guess what? That's retrieval, right? That's search at the end of the day. So talk more about how that kind of starts to evolve. And people, to me, it seems like, oh yeah, RAG, just use RAG, right? Like, oh yeah, it's just RAG. And that solves the problem. It's like, check the box. Tell me about why that's not necessarily true and why RAG is not necessarily the answer. It's part of the answer, but it depends on so many other things. So maybe you can break that apart a little bit.
Yeah, and you gave a really good explanation of what RAG is. I will say that even RAG is becoming passé now. It's no longer the thing. And the reason for that is because RAG is good when you're doing sort of like a stateless conversation. You're just in that session, you've had a little bit of a conversation and it pulls relevant information and augments the generation. But what we're moving into, the world of agents, you need statefulness. And what does that mean? It means that agents can remember what happened the last time, a week ago, a month ago, a year ago, what you did on this particular topic. And so RAG is sort of like not able to help with that. And so I think, that is where the limitations of RAG come in. The second thing is, I just want to touch upon what you said, the limitation of an LLM. LLMs are very expensive to train. And so the history that they have of the internet is actually outdated. It's maybe 6 months old, it's maybe a year old, and to retrain it is very, very expensive, which is why LLMs have to depend on retrieval to get the latest information. So, you put the fact that more information is being created all the time, and the fact that the LLMs don't have that information built into their world model, you need the ability to pull information, which is a search problem, which is a retrieval problem. And so, yeah, RAG is no longer in vogue, Seth. Unfortunately, the new word is memory now, and everyone is talking about that because it allows agents to become more powerful and actually do useful work.
So that's interesting. And it's funny because the terminology and the technology and the latest and greatest changes so quickly, and organizations have challenges not only absorbing, there's currency of the approach, and then there's the ability to absorb change, right? And of course, technology changes faster than the business can absorb, and then it's changing more quickly. The business can only absorb so much. And so you're always going to have this lag. And so we still are talking to lots of people that say, hey, I just want to find my stuff, right? So I still think there is, even though you may say that RAG is passe, I think that there's still a fundamental challenge around retrieval and finding information. How do you reconcile that with what organizations are trying to do? When you talk about memory, you're talking about retaining context, right? Over sessions, over longer periods of time. I'm amazed when I am putting stuff into my LLM of choice, which can be Claude or ChatGPT, and I'm giving it very complex problems to solve, and I'm giving it lots of information, and it does amaze me at the ability for it to synthesize from what I'm giving it based on what it's already keeping in long-term memory, which I'm always telling it to update. I'm saying, make sure you put this in long-term memory. So tell me a little bit more about, how these things are complementary, and then what does an organization need to do in order to get the best of both worlds? So tell me what happens if they ignore one or the other, and then what's the foundation for both?
So, when we talk about retrieval augmented generation, we're really talking about retrieving content that is maybe only with a particular enterprise. And then we are augmenting and creating a generation out of that. When we talk about memory, we're talking about context, as you said. But what is context? Context is content that is relevant from the past, content that is relevant right now to the current conversation or the current task that you have going on. It is related to the interactions that you had before, so that you can, bring that forward into what is the latest, up-to-date, context that you have with the topic. So I'll give you an example. I lost my bike. I had to file an insurance claim, police records, and all of that. It got stolen. So I had to work with ChatGPT. I'm like, how do you do all of this? It was a 3 or 4 week period that I was engaging with it. And by the third week, it started to forget things that I had told it before. And it was really, really annoying. And so this is where you have to bring in both RAG and memory concepts together. And that is effectively, under the hood, it's a search problem because you're searching through past interactions and finding the most relevant things to bring up in that moment. And so you do need both. And I think organizations are really sort of like firstly confused. There's like so much going on right now. All these buzzwords keep floating about. And then the second thing is they do not know how to use these. I think there's a little bit of analysis paralysis as well as like which one, like what happens if tomorrow there's a new thing that comes out again as well. So I think there's a little bit of that paralysis going on as well. And then I think the third thing is they understand that they have really important data, but that data right now is stuck either because it's not clean or it is stuck in static workflows. And so if you think about the world that we came from, it was all about static workflows, rules-driven workflows. When this happens, if this happens, do that. And now you're moving to a dynamic world where those rules are constantly being updated. And so I think enterprises are struggling to figure out how to, because it changes their entire product, it changes their business model, it changes so many things about them that they're struggling to figure out how to manage that leap into the new world. So that's what we're seeing constantly. And so the bolder ones are ready to like just say, you know what, let's just go into it. The more traditional, maybe companies that have crossed the chasm, have large businesses, they have to take care of their existing customers. Like that middle ground is very messy for them.
It's very risky to say, let's just boldly go forth into the unknown, right? I think you have to have experiments, right? You have to control the experiments, but you have to be careful about that and have a mechanism for managing that and for controlling it and for monitoring the results. One of the things we're doing for an organization right now is we're putting that in place. We're saying, how do you manage and control your experiments, and how do you measure the results of those? And how do you make sure that you're not spinning up applications that are going to run up enormous token usage and enormous bills for things that are going off in some part of the organization you may not know about, right? So, there's the let 1,000 flowers bloom, idea of AI experimentation. And there's also, well, let's make sure that we're not reinventing things all the time, that we're are harvesting the best practices, that we're normalizing on some of those, that we're sharing those appropriately, the building standards. And so tell me a little bit about, how you see organizations doing that. So, with your technology, with Algolia, how does it fit in with this changing world and with trying to reconcile long-term memory, which is not just retrieval, but there's certainly some retrieval. It's retrieval of past interactions and contexts with the actual search mechanism. How do you resolve that? How do you reconcile that?
Yeah. And actually, I'll take a step back from what you said, which is to also say that companies, I think, do not know, enterprises actually do not know how to experiment. And there's two parts to it. One is just the culture of experimentation. It's very alien and discomforting to do that all the time. And then the second is the safety side of it. Like, how do you make sure it doesn't, run off with token usage or create a bad customer experience and, all of that stuff. So I think both are important. Algolia, we are providing a platform where customers can actually divert a portion of their traffic and they can build all of these new experiments, whether it's agents that can then retrieve using RAG or agents that can augment let's say it's a shopping agent, right? And the shopping agent knows that you, Seth, came a week ago or a month ago and you had bought something for your kids. And so now you've come in and the agent says, hey, how did those shoes for your kids fit? Are you here to buy socks or maybe jeans or whatever it is, right? So that's
or hey, let me try to sell you shoes again and again and again and again.
Exactly.
Let me retarget you about shoes because you once looked at shoes and kids' shoes. So forever on, I'm gonna that's the wrong usage, right?
And you just snagged the right point here, which is that personalization, that was the world of personalization. This is the alleged personalization, exactly. This is the world of, I know you did this last time, and so now what are you here to do? Are you here to augment that? Or are you here to do something else? And so that effectively, when you then break it down, that agent has to first understand the context, which means it has to retrieve that past interaction. And then based on what that customer, that end consumer is typing in, actually, you know what, I'm not here for my son anymore. I'm here for myself. It then has to retrieve a whole different set of information that particular retailer might have. So, we're moving into that world now, and I'll address the cultural side of experimentation. What we are also noticing is that enterprises struggle to have a constant experimentation mode. Like it's just either it's not in their DNA or it's just very hard to do. And we're moving into a world where actually AI can do the experiments for you also. So how do we, so what we're working on is how do we allow experimentation to happen autonomously so that you also don't have to like put your DNA, you don't have to change your DNA to be able to do that. And so we're starting to see that. Can AI rewrite the experiments? Can AI run a different experiment? Keep optimizing. What is the best thing?
Can you give us a tangible example of that? So, I think of this as it's almost like multivariate testing, where you map out what kind of an artisan approach to the customer experience, right? This is what that ideal path is. This is the happy path. Here's how I'm going to recommend products and so on. And then I have this componentized in such a way that I can change out different things. I can change out my hero image. I can change out my call to action. I can change the value proposition. It can change the target, right? I have I have a messaging architecture that's componentized, that's like Mad Libs, right? Or Legos or Mad Libs, where you can change out the different elements of it, but it all has a flow that makes sense. And then the multivariate testing is switching those things in and out and optimizing for a goal, right? And the goal is greater clicks or conversions or sales or whatever it is, right?
Whatever it
So
is. Yep.
talk about how you see either your technology or you see a similar technology achieving those experimentations. And that experimentation, is it a similar idea? What are the things that you're experimenting with, and what are the parameters? How do you design that experiment, and how do you execute on that?
Yeah. So we have an internal platform that we call the workflows runtime. And basically, it is exactly like how you described it. It is made up of all the Lego pieces and it can automatically switch itself in and out.
So you need those Lego pieces. You need that consistent architecture. You need the information architecture on the content or on the product information. And then you need a messaging architecture that tells you how those Legos fit in with each other.
Totally. And right now, we're using it just internally for things like, hey, we have these ranking Lego blocks. How do you rank which is the best, content that is being pulled out? Or, hey, the Lego block, we need to pull out long-term memory and bias that more than short-term memory. So, these are all Lego pieces that you can sort of like declare, and the AI can sort of like say, okay, I'm going to figure it out now. And now what we are working on is how do we in the future externalize this runtime? Really, we're thinking of it as a runtime so that every Lego block in the planet, whether you're using some Lang chain or Lang graph or anything, like can you plug these in, and can agents then sort of like use all these Lego blocks to achieve the goal that you're trying to get to? You mentioned click-throughs, conversions, engagement, whatever is the goal. So we are in a world where massive experimentation can happen at a hyper velocity that was not possible before. And you got to have modular Lego pieces to allow for that. And if we don't do it that way, you will, as an enterprise, fall behind those who can do that.
Right. And then the fundamental, so if an organization if a business leader or technology leader is listening to this and they say, okay, this sounds reasonable. I need to have these Lego blocks. I need to do experimentation. I need to enable my agentic technologies to do this. Where do they start? Like, and then what's the beginning of something like this? Because again, there's experimentation, but you're talking about systematizing that experimentation or operationalizing that experimentation at scale using the tools, but there still has to be guardrails and parameters. So what's the starting point of a lot of this stuff?
Yeah, it's a great question. My goal is not to tell enterprises that they need to discard everything that they have and like rebuild. That is not practical.
It's not going to happen.
It's not going to happen. So the question is, what have these enterprises been doing? They understand that all of this starts with data, and they need to understand that data needs to sit somewhere in a way that is accessible. So that has commonly been what for the last 2-3 years has been vector databases. But these vector databases are now not efficient anymore because of the rate at which information is being created. They can't keep up. They're expensive, etc. But what is important is that you need some data store that can sort of like normalize across all the different databases that a company might have. They have, SQL databases, they have CDPs, they have, so many different, the marketing data store, the sales data store. So you need a common platform that can reach into those data stores and pull out relevant pieces. And that's sort of like what Algolia does. Like we can reach out, pull it in, and then use that to power agents and whatnot. So nobody needs to re-architect their entire stack. Like we've got to make the existing world work with the new world. That's how traditionally companies have been doing it. They've been starting with a vector DB, but the problem is once you get a vector DB, you need to build RAG, then you need to build memory, then you got to scale the damn thing. Like it's a complicated engineering problem. So what Algolia has done is sort of like abstract all of that away, and so then give you the ability to not change your own architecture, but give us the access into those data stores, because then you get a much more relevant, stateful generative experience or an agentic experience.
So if we abstract from the product or the technology that you're talking about, and we say generalized, it's a federated model of reaching into these data sources, which is, been around for a little while. But you're saying you're not, so you still need some platform to reconcile this or to build a unified index of some sort, right? And then you're saying that that's not necessarily going to be, you're not necessarily ingesting into a vector space. So
you are, just to
You
be
are.
clear, you are.
Okay.
Like Algolia under the hood runs the largest vector database, but our vector database is a bit different. We actually work it as a search index, and it is
Okay.
very fast and it's very efficient, and it can be updated constantly. So enterprises don't have to worry about that anymore. And so, but that is not enough. Like on top of that, you need the retrieval capabilities, the ranking capability. You need the ability to respect the business rules that the company has about their data. These are all things that in the open source world or the world that we're in right now, every enterprise has to stitch every one of these pieces together. And that's the hard part of doing it. And then after you've stitched it, which is already really hard, then you got to play the Lego game on top of that. Like, hey, how do I do these experiments now? And like, is everything like working as it should be? Like,
Sure.
I mean, these are you need like vast resources as an enterprise to be able to go do these things.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think that's where they're stuck. They're like, ugh, okay, how do I do this?
Yeah.
And especially if you're not a tech first company, like you're
Oh,
stuck even more.
right.
So we're trying to abstract all of that away for enterprises and say, here is the starting point. Point whatever data you need in, declare your goals, whatever those goals are, and let us sort of like optimize it on your behalf.
Yeah. And again, we don't want to do a product pitch here, right? We want to give people general principles that they can apply regardless of their technology stack. And I understand you have capabilities that can do some of these things, which is fine, which is great, and people should know about that, right? So they should investigate this. But I think the core issue is constructing this in a way that is serving use cases that can be testable, right? Because you need to say, what are we trying to achieve here, and what is the business value that we're going to get from this? And if I switch gears a little bit and talk about agentic approaches, now, in your opinion, what is the hype? So we talked about kind of the whole problem challenge of retrieval and augmentation and memory, and the idea of building these unified indexes, and then whether it's a vector space, how that needs to be updated, whether you can create a search index from that, and so on. That's all kind of good stuff to know. Let's switch a little bit and talk about agentic approaches and agentic technologies and how organizations are looking at that, and what do you see as the big challenges and issues of confusion and hype in when people refer to agents and say, okay, we're not going to think about these other things. Now we're going to talk about agents. Now we're going to build agents, and agents can do all these things. And of course, agentic approaches have been around for a very long time. At the simplest level, it's calling another source of information or executing an action. And some of the examples I've seen are very trivial. They're adding two numbers, or they're doing something ridiculous. But talk a little bit about that, and maybe you could define in that context some of the mechanisms around that, things like MCPs and agent to agent. But start off talking about what does that big picture look like, and where's the hype and where's the reality?
Yeah, so I think I'll start first by just stating that there's a difference between generative AI and agentic AI. And I think a lot of people, we're still in the world where there's a lot of like confusion about those two things. Generative AI, as the name suggests, is generating new content that didn't exist before, like summaries and, recommendations and so on and so forth. Agentic AI is about executing tasks. Now, it might generate some new content to help it to execute the task, but it is all about executing tasks. And so in the world of agents, it's about automation of tasks. It's about, improving your productivity, your efficiency, because the agents can do the tasks that maybe humans were doing before, and they can do it in a autonomous way. And so, when we think about a simple framework to think about this is in the world of search, traditional search, humans were doing requests and they would get a response. In the world of in the world of agents, you're going into event driven, which means that, hey, something happens, do this. And that's what an agent does. And it combines it with goal driven. So I have a goal. If this happens, do that. And it's doing all of this autonomously. And so, firstly, I think most people confuse the two because what you see today put out as agentic solutions are like chatbots. Like really, that's what you see, like little chatbots on the right, bottom right, and they say that's our agent. The reality is that that's Clippy from the past, if you remember. It's just a really fancy,
Clippy.
it's a really fancy Clippy, but it is just a thing. Now, so first up, that's the difference between the two. Now, I think that for
generating content versus achieving an action or executing an action.
Exactly. A simple example would be, let's say there's a customer support agent that you're talking to, and it can do the entire return. It can process the return by itself. It can also trigger the shipping of any new items, etc., without any humans in the loop. And so it's sort of like is taking care of all of that and increasing the efficiency and reducing the sort of like the humans in the loop process that might be there. So I think, that's a simple agent that we're starting to see. So I think, that's how I think enterprises are also thinking about it. They're looking at different workflows that are existing within their organization, and they're trying to see where can we insert autonomous AI to replace that. And so that's what I think, that's how most companies are starting. And so you will see simple ones right now because everyone is going to start with the simple workflows. And then at some point it'll get, much more sophisticated.
Yeah. So when you think about the stuff that we've been doing for a while in the industry, robotic process automation, that is doing things that are rules-based. So what is the line between, RPA and autonomy? Because we're saying that, RPA can operate semi-autonomously, right? It can go off and do some stuff and, replace a person, keying in information or, go from one screen to another or execute some predefined processes. So when do we get into what we're referring to as an autonomous agent versus robotic process automation?
I think it comes to event driven. So can you build rules or, process automation, which are really static workflows? Can you build all the static workflows in the world? Probably not. So can you have agents rewrite or create new workflows on the fly because certain events that you didn't think about have happened? And so, we constantly see this, right? Like there'll be some edge condition or some workflow that wasn't thought of. And then we hit that. And as humans, we're frustrated. We're stuck in a loop of some sort. But in the world of agents, like they can see that and say, okay, we need a new workflow to be introduced. So it becomes dynamic in that sense. And I think that what is important with that is the guardrails that the business needs to put in place for that, because you also don't want them to go rogue and create like random things that don't respect any of their
How autonomous can it be? Yeah, right.
autonomous can it be? And I think, that's the way to sort of like think about this world. So anyway, I think that's a challenge for companies right now. But I think, RPA is going to benefit from agents. So it's not just about robotic, it's also about now can you create some of these newer ones, newer workflows and newer automations dynamically
Within prescribed parameters. And give me your definition of protocols for agent communication, such as MCPs. What are your thoughts around a model context protocol? How does that fit in? What is it? And then how do organizations need to think about MCP?
MCP is an API for agents. That's the simplest way to think about it. MCP is just an interface for agents to talk to one another and to get answers or information back from other systems and other agents. That's all that MCP is. And, it handles fancy stuff like authentication and permissions and all of that. But ultimately, it's an interface layer. And what companies can do if they build an MCP, what they can do is parameterize what is those guardrails that, this MCP can respond with to another agent. So I think, that's what MCP is. And I think it's gotten probably the most adoption right now when it comes to communicating with different agents and different data sources and retrieving different information. There is also, Google, I believe, is pushing a lot on what they call the A2A SDK, the agent to agent SDK. And that is, I would say, a layer of sophistication above the MCP, because there you're actually defining actual agents as if they were humans. And you're sort of like giving them personality, you're giving them their role, you're giving them their purpose, and these agents then talk to other agents. And so if you look at the Google's SDK, you can define things like personality and things like that, which is, I guess, just the next evolution. It's still early days though for that.
So when you think about, an agent and you think about all the different parameters around, say, personality, those are represented in an LLM in a vector space, right, with lots of parameters. In other words, there's n dimensions. It's the number of features that are handled in these large language models, which can be thousands and tens of thousands, right, of parameters. And essentially, that's a mathematical representation, typically of content, of a piece of content. And then these agent behaviors or these personalities come from how those parameters are being operated upon or retrieved based on some interaction, right? So you're saying if I is retaining things in long-term memory about me, I can ask it questions. I can say, based on the samples of writing I've given it, what do you know about me? What can you tell me about my style? What can you tell me about my preferences? So it has a representation, a mathematical representation of what it understands about me. Correct. However, I can only ask it so many specific questions. I can only look at so much explicit knowledge, which are the parameters around these LLMs and around agent-to-agent protocols or MCPs, right? Because we're saying we're embodying a whole range of variables, a whole range of representations in this multidimensional model. However, we're kind of flattening that, right? We're abstracting that to say, well, what are the things I can define in language and in metadata?
Yep.
But that is a fraction of what is represented in the large language model, right? So now the question is, it's like these models know much more about me than I can define or I can express. I can't define all those parameters. I can't even put them in English. In other words, they have mathematical representations that cannot be translated into language because they are so abstract and they are latent, right? These are attributes that are defined in multi dimensions that we cannot necessarily translate into explicit. It's a very lossy representation, right?
Correct.
So now the question is, first of all, do I want that language model to know so much about me that I can't even define, right? That I can't express as language. In other words, it knows more about me than we can communicate. And if we get those language models communicating with one another, they can communicate stuff that we as humans can't necessarily understand. This is kind of a long-term implication around large language models and around representations of agents. Agents will be able to codify much, much more than humans will be able to codify or represent. It just doesn't translate. What are your thoughts about that, and what are the implications? Because it seems like there can be some ramifications of this, shall we say, that have privacy implications, that have autonomy implications, that have bad actor implications, right? We know that in controlled environments, that researchers have been able to induce unexpected behaviors, or maybe predictable behaviors, but surprising behaviors on the part of agents, where they have acted in ways, or LLMs, and I'm using those terms a little bit interchangeably, they've acted in ways that are not completely transparent or honest. They've been duplicitous. If they're given goals that they need to achieve at any cost, they will resort to behaviors around blackmailing or lying. And so when you think about this, the fact that these things are getting more and more powerful, that they have representations that we can't understand, that they'll be able to communicate in ways that we can't necessarily understand. Does that concern you? And what do you think the implications of that might be?
There's a lot there, but I think let me try and unpack it. I think it's a really, really important topic. And maybe I'll use a simple example to sort of like unpack it. So I grew up in a time early on when you would go to a physical human travel agent, if you remember those days. And you would sit down with them and say, hey, I want to go to the Maldives or wherever it is. Like, can you recommend me what I need to do, etc. And over time, you build a relationship with that particular human travel agent. Now, what happens is, if for those of your listeners and viewers who can remember this time, over time, what happens is that there is a judgment that is being made by your travel agent on what your preferences really are versus what you think they are. And they sort of like get that because they've seen the interactions, they've seen what you like, and you might not even be able to express that to them in the same way that they know about you. So in a way, we are back in that world where you have agents, and now I'm using agents as the autonomous agents, the AI agents, who know more about you in a way that you don't know about yourself. And I think what is disconcerting about that is humans couldn't, in the previous example, that human travel agent, even though they knew more about you, you knew that you could keep pace with them. I think in this world, the amount of information that is there and the speed at which they can actually learn feels very disconcerting to you as an interactor of that LLM or that agent. So I think that is there's a cognitive sort of like overload that is happening as a result of that. But at its basic core, that is what ultimately it is supposed to be, a useful, better way of achieving the tasks that you want. Now, you bring up a lot of other points, which is, okay, but how do you make sure that it's controlled? How do you make sure they're not hallucinating and blackmailing and, deceiving and nefarious and all of that? And
in the hands of a bad actor, they're going to know enough about you that they'll be able to manipulate you without your awareness. I mean, I think Instagram does that to me already, right? It's like I get sucked into this black hole of feeds and things and products that I end up buying, and it's like, geez, they've hijacked my brain.
And so again, if you go previous human world, all of that was still also possible. You could have scams, phishing emails, like, viruses that could attack the systems and extract information, etc. It's just that the nature of them now is very different, and we haven't actually developed the technologies to help with all of that. So I think that that's the shift that is happening. And the fact that it's happening at a speed that is unprecedented, I think is what is making this cognitively it feels way more dangerous to all of us. But my take on this is that we're not going to reverse. It's sort of like we've let the genie out of the bottle. And so there are whole new economies of companies that are evolving to solve the problems that you just said. How do you make sure it's not blackmail, nefarious, all of that stuff? Authentication is a big deal right now in the world of agents. Like, is this agent the agent that I thought I was talking to? Like, even that is becoming a thing now. Like, agent identity is a big thing. So, and we have seen many startups who are working in that space. How do you create agent identity and you make sure that it is actually who they say they are, and what are their parameters? So, I think we're going to see more and more of those. I don't think that world is going to revert back to the previous world. I think the speed at which it is going is really, really fast, which is what is making people sort of like not able to keep up with it and feel nervous about it. But I think, that is where the world is headed. And so we've got to figure out what that transition looks like. And I think there are many startups attacking these different problem areas.
Yeah. And I think that, it's if we extrapolate, there's a great podcast, Your Undivided Attention, that has had some researchers on it that have, and I have to get reference to those research papers, but where they've kind of just extrapolated where we're going, especially with agents or AI designing more AI and the increasing power of these systems and these tools. And for the first time, I thought, wow, this really does represent a threat, right, to society and to to our way of life, because we don't know where these things are going. I'm not an alarmist. I'm a rationalist. I'm very much, what's the immediate issue, but I can see, as these become more powerful and as they learn more about us and as they are, building these profiles of who we are, depending upon who you're trusting with that information and how they're using it, it could potentially be detrimental to individuals and to organizations. So it's something we have to be very careful about. And I think especially when you start looking at financial applications, for example, around agent technology, as those become more embedded in systems, we have to really anticipate the potential unintended consequences and be able to manage that and be able to manage those risks. So I know it's a little bit off the original topic of retrieval, but
no, I think
part of it,
I mean, at the end of the day, under the hood, they all need to retrieve and then act on something. So
That's
it's
right.
not really
It's,
off. I would say that there,
yes.
in the last, I would say 150 years, I think there have been three big changes that have challenged humanity. We had the Industrial Revolution. It changed how things are built, and it was a completely new way. People lost jobs. There were no guardrails back then on quality. Like, how do you do all of this? And we evolved. Then there was the internet era. Suddenly communications was everywhere. The communication was democratized. And what did that mean? It meant that someone in another part of the world got information immediately, and that had a whole bunch of implications. I think this is the next one that I can think of. Agentic and its implications are maybe even bigger than the previous two ones. And so I have firm belief that we will evolve and put in and understand how to address this new model of the world. But I think it feels like we're rushing so quickly into it that it feels like, oh my gosh, can we even keep up with this?
Yeah, that is the challenge. And I think, for any decision maker listening in, it comes back to the basics, right? It's what are you trying to accomplish? What value are you creating? What is your competitive advantage? How are you improving the employee experience or the customer experience? How are you adding efficiency to the process? How are you improving your competitive advantage? And those are the fundamentals and those are the basics. And then we build on those and try to still anticipate the risks and the potential downside of these things.
100%.
Well, listen,
I would say just to add to that, Seth, I would just say for all your viewers and enterprises, like, it's okay to start small. Find the small places where you can improve all of the things that you just said, but keep doing them more and more. Multiply them. Over time, when you look past a year or 2 years of doing this, I think you'll have a very different company from when you started. And you might not realize it along the way, but if you keep doing them in small iterations, you will end up with a much better outcome.
Yeah, the evolution is happening. And it's funny, I was talking to another person who's going to be a future guest on the podcast about risk management, compliance, and they're saying there's still some companies out there that's like, no to AI. Absolutely not. No, we're not going to do it. And it's like, ooh, geez, you're not going to stay in business if you don't think about this.
There will always be people at both ends of the spectrum.
That's right.
And that's just the nature of the world and enterprises. So, but I don't think we can ignore what is happening as well.
Absolutely not. Well, Bharat, thank you so much for sharing your perspective on how AI is transforming search, retrieval, agentic technologies. These are all such very important topics. And for listeners, be sure to subscribe to the AI podcast, Earley AI Podcast, more insights. Bharat, where can people find you? We'll put it in the show notes. LinkedIn,
you can find me on LinkedIn, Bharat Guruprakash. that's I check it a lot. I'm more of a LinkedIn person than a Twitter person. So,
Yeah.
or X. So, LinkedIn is the best way to reach me if you want to talk more about this stuff. And it was wonderful to be on here, Seth.
Well, thank you again. This has been terrific, really interesting conversation. So I really appreciate your time. And thank you to our audience, and thank you to Carolyn for doing all the production work behind the scenes. And we will see you on the next episode of the Earley AI Podcast. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on another deep dive into AI innovation. Tune in next time when we introduce another industry expert and discuss how to maximize AI in your world. The Earley AI Podcast is sponsored by Earley Information Science and Vector. To learn more, visit earley.com. That's EARLEY.com. Thank you for tuning in.